And of course, there is the other kind of geoengineering, direct extraction of CO2, which I think everyone would agree is benign because it's just undoing the geoengineering we've done to the climate, as it were, by enhancing CO2. But of course, the question is whether those techniques, which in principle could actually bring down the CO2 concentration, will ever be viable. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the CO2 extraction, let's wave a magic wand, and let's have a technology which we can implement to do carbon sequestration and storage at a scale of, say, 20 billion tonnes per year. Mm. One thing I fear is that CO2 being a colourless, odourless gas, I think there will be a lot of cowboys out there who will accept the money to extract the CO2. How do you prove that it's been done successfully? How do you prove that the CO2 has been nicely packed away down in the depths of the ocean, let's say? How do you prove that it stays there?
Well, you need research into the storage.
You need research into storage.
Of geology and the deep ocean issues.
And when is that research going to be done, and how much time have we got to do it? And we've got very little time.
No, but that's something which should certainly be done, because I think everyone would agree that if the direct extraction could be done without it requiring excessive energy, then it would be worth considering, and no one would object to that. But as you say, that has these huge demands on the storage requirements and the stability of the storage. Well, but we should do R&D into that.
Storing 20 billion tonnes or more of CO2 per year is it's an incredible challenge. There's 7 billion people on the planet. That's about 3 tonnes of CO2 per person averaged over the planet. If I gave you 3 tonnes of bricks or 3 tonnes of anything, I give you 3 tonnes of your favourite pudding every year, and you have to dispose of it responsibly and safely. How are you going to do that? CO2 is an incredibly slippery, elusive substance. Yet 3 tonnes of your favourite pudding, you would still have difficulty disposing of that safely.
Yes.
When are we going to begin to evaluate and implement technologies on that scale?
Yes. So do you say it's so hopeless we shouldn't even try?
Not at all. It's really important, but I don't think that we're going to do it in 10 or 20 years. I think we will succeed over the next 50 or 100 years. So then the question is, what do we do to buy us some time? And this is where I think, as reluctant as we ought to be to enter into a geoengineered future, I think there is a way of buying us some time with responsible research and then perhaps implementation of geoengineering to reflect sunlight for a period of time over which we get this essential carbon extraction sorted out. Then we wind down the solar radiation management. I sense that there is a structure that could be deployed in that way. Without thinking that through, I think we'll find ourselves in 20 or 30 years' time looking back at this so-called successful Paris Agreement, wondering how we let the opportunity slip through our hands. The opportunities we've got now to think things through carefully, with everything on the table, we're in a good position. If we let ourselves examine all the possible options. Nuclear must be on the table. I think geoengineering must be on the table. Everything has to be on the table. If we rule things out, then we'll perhaps end up ruling everything.
I'd agree with that, but do you think it's a credible long-term scenario to be 100 years from now still using fossil fuels but having all the carbon sucked out as fast as it's produced.
No, it's the lung transplant thing, that if you're going to have a lung transplant, you have to give up smoking. That's it. You do not get your lung transplant if you're going to carry on smoking. That's where we're at. We are behaving irresponsibly by burning fossil fuels. We have to stop. That's a given. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. I mean, that's right.
Yeah.
It is a given.
I think so, and I think that will happen, and it could be nuclear, fourth generation. It could be solar with distribution worldwide by smart grids, or it could be solar from energy from space.
What are we going to do about aircraft flying? Do we stop flying, or do we have clever planes?
Well, of course, it's a separate question whether the amount of flying we do is going to go up or down. It's not obvious it's going to keep on going up.
When was the last time you paid more than £100 for a flight? Or perhaps you always pay more than 100. But
yes.
You can fly to, choose your time of day, you can fly to anywhere in Europe for less than £100. Sure, if you want to travel at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, you can't do that for £100. But go to Berlin on a Monday afternoon, £60. Is that right? It's not right. It's not right. The idea that flying is considered, it's a right, I think, now. You look at the way that flying is romanticised. Anything that involves flying must be wonderful. Going on a holiday where you drive to your destination is less thrilling than going on a holiday where you have to fly. That's just got to change. I went to Paris for COP21. I went out of curiosity, and it was extraordinary just how many people there were with personal stories to tell, the indigenous people from all around the world. And there was a real sense of positive optimism and excitement. But that when it came to it, the COP21 agreement, all the excitement, the bottom-up excitement, just vanished, because there's nothing in the agreement that seems to offer anything to the people who are most likely to suffer from the effects of climate change. So, as much as we might try the bottom-up approach, I don't think that worked in Paris. I just don't think it did. And what we're left with is an agreement, a top-down agreement signed by nearly 200 countries, which probably won't work. Now, am I being harsh on that Paris Agreement? I don't think so. I think that perhaps if we do get a bottom-up success, it won't be bottom-up at meetings like COP21. It'll have to be bottom-up via social media, well, if politicians begin to get a bad name because the media presents them badly because of the way they've responded to the Paris Agreement, that may be the bottom-up approach. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Martin, that the press can have a big impact on politicians. Is that the kind of bottom-up approach that will work?
Press and public, I mean, I think it may not be right to try and get 200 countries to agree on anything, but I think the effect of Paris was indeed to raise this on the agenda, and I think if the developing countries keep banging on about this, that is going to be helpful rather than otherwise. And so let's hope they do. Let's hope their public is aware of this, and let's hope that some people in our parts of the world are influenced, if only by the Pope and others, to care about these issues more. So I think that will help. And I think governments will have to do something, which they can by changing the subsidy and tax regimes. They can affect the economics of fracking and fossil fuels compared to renewables, and that can have a big difference. And of course, the other thing that's been discussed, and I think it's probably more hopeful than the Paris deal, is the idea of a club of nations getting together to impose a high carbon tax and then imposing a tariff on imports from countries outside the club, as it were. And that seems to be viable, and there was debate about whether the WTO would allow it, but that seems okay. And this might be a way to do it, because I think everyone agrees that if you want to change the behavior of the private sector, you've got to have a carbon tax of some kind. And if we can't have this globally, we could perhaps have it within some sort of set of countries, which would then penalize countries outside it, this club, as it were, by imposing a tariff on their imports. That's the kind of thing that may work. But I think above all, public sector and the governments can help by promoting R&D, because we do need new ideas. And there may be breakthroughs, and the sooner they come, the better. And the sooner we can bring down the cost of existing renewables like solar, the more likely it is that the developing world will be able to shift directly to clean energy without feeling pressured to build power stations when they have a genuine need, obviously, to increase their power availability. So I think we've got to do all these things, and I think it's going to be public pressure, which is mediated by the press and by faith groups and all these others, and it's going to be political pressure, and it's going to be economic pressure, which is going to depend on governments imposing a carbon tax and giving subsidies in some areas and not in others.
If the ordinary citizen is not aware of the impact that they're having on the climate, they're going to be less likely to change their ways. And one example of this, I think, is flying. That if you fly to Australia from England, about 20 hours of flying, you are personally responsible for over 1 ton of CO2. Mm-hmm. Now, we know that a suitcase that you check in weighs about 20 kilograms. So a ton of CO2 is 50 of these suitcases. Mm-hmm. That's probably an underestimate. It's probably more like 2 tons. Mm-hmm. If you arrive at Sydney and you've got 50 or 100 suitcases of your waste, which you have to pick up at the carousel. Yep. And before you go to your hotel, you have to arrange for this waste to be disposed. Mm-hmm. I think you might be less excited about travelling to Sydney. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yet we sit on this plane oblivious, absolutely oblivious of those 50, 100 suitcases worth of waste per person. Now, how can we possibly expect a bottom-up rebellion, as it were, against our profligate use of fossil fuels if we are simply blind to the problem?
Yes, with great difficulty, I would say, but a carbon tax would help. And
but won't people be wondering, why should we have a carbon tax? It's affecting me, but I'm not the problem. It's those other people that are the problem, until people realise that they are the problem.
Well, I think it's true that we in this country are 2% of the problem. That's why I think we can make more difference through our technologies and through actually savings here, though we should set an example. But I think...
But hold on, you say that we in this country are 2% of the
2%
problem.
of the problem, yes.
I think we have to break that down a bit. Within the UK, 90% of people in the UK are not making much of a contribution to that 2%.
Yes.
So within the UK...
So it's we jet setters who are the problem.
Exactly.
That's true.
My carbon footprint, I think, is about 4 times above the UK average. Yours probably about the same. I just don't know. And that's because I have family in Australia and I go there perhaps once, perhaps twice a year. Now I shouldn't be doing that, but it's very hard when family is at stake. But we have to accept the fact that some people are having a much bigger impact than others.
yes.
Some countries are having a much bigger impact than others. The responsibility ought to lie at the feet of not only those countries, but also those individuals that are having the biggest impact. How do we find out who we are?
Well, I think we accept that in the case of all public expenditure, all demands on each other's. So I think this is just one, and we should do something about this. But we've got to bear in mind that the UK is a country that can have more than 2% impact on the world by our choices, and we should certainly do that. Even though flying is the hard one can have an effect, I think, through public pressure on wasteful energy consumption in the home. I mean, insulating your houses and also making it naff rather than stylish to have a Chelsea tractor 4x4 to drive around the town in, that sort of thing. And I think just as there have been changes in attitudes towards smoking and drink and drive, then I think attitudes towards manifestly extravagant consumption of energy could gradually change. So I'm hopeful about that. Flying is a hard one. When you
go to certain countries, I think I go to Melbourne or Sydney, and in the middle of winter, you go to a cafe and you're sitting out on the pavement, and of course they've got these gas burners that are there, so you can sit out in the middle of winter in shorts and a t-shirt. That seems to be just accepted that that's what you do.
Yes. Well, that could be changed. You could imagine government action could control that, and I think private pressure could have a big effect on whether people feel it's appropriate to drive around in extremely gas-guzzling cars.
But surely this ought to be obvious already. I mean, aren't we at a point in this climate change debate or climate change predicament that how much more do we need to say to relatively intelligent, educated people that it's obvious that they ought not to be so wasteful? Yet the message isn't getting through. Just isn't getting through.
But it is because people feel that individuals make only a tiny difference. That is the problem. And of course, it's worse than in most contexts where we have to be part of society, because the downside of the climate change, although it is apparent already in some parts of the world, is mainly going to be felt by the next generation and generation after that, and also by people in remote parts of the world. And of course, to get people to make sacrifices now on behalf of people on the other side of the world 50 years from now is harder than to get them to make sacrifices for some immediate benefit here and now. And so that's why it's a problem for politicians and also a problem for individuals. We tend obviously to channel our charitable instincts more to contexts where we feel we make an immediate local difference. And so I think it's an inherent problem, and that's why I think governments have to play a role, because as in many other contexts, you are only active if other people do. I mean, for instance, many people feel that the tax rates ought to be higher to provide better public services, but that doesn't mean you feel that you can make much difference by just volunteering to pay extra tax. You only do it if other people do it as well. So I think there are many contexts where we want to agitate for public action collectively, which will make a difference, even if our individual choices don't make a difference.
It's absolutely right. But
I mean, if you volunteer to pay an extra £500 in tax to improve the health service,
but see,
you wouldn't feel you do anything.
Wealthy people, not only, I suppose, ought to be paying more tax to help the people that are worse off, but ultimately, wealthy people in wealthy countries, will be able to protect themselves against the ravages of climate change, and will continue to protect themselves. So. Will we ever really feel the effects of climate change? Because if we have to change the way our agriculture works in the UK, we will. If some people have to build houses on slightly higher ground, they will. But there are other countries in the world where there simply are no options, and they will suffer enormously. And are we in a kind of let them eat cake world where we just don't get it, and we seem to think that others in the world will make do like we have to make do, but we have it easy.
We do, and I think political pressure and international pressure is going to make us feel we've got to do something for the countries that are more vulnerable. And I think clearly, if we see the way the world is going, the relative political clout of those countries is going to rise. And so they are going to be able to impose even sanctions or pressures on us. And so I'm not too pessimistic about global agreements.
But are these global agreements going to be in time to make any difference to climate change, or will we simply be responding by adapting to the ravages of climate change?
Well, obviously, sooner the better, but I think we mustn't let people feel that if we don't do something soon, it's never worthwhile.
Yeah, we've got to be doing things.
Always it's better to do it, but it would have been better to do it sooner rather than later, but it's still better to do it at any time. And I think it will happen, but I agree it's not going to come soon enough to remove the genuine threat that something really bad may happen 100 years from now. Well, politics is difficult.
It's completely absurd that in a country like India, where solar energy has enormous potential to benefit the whole country, to enable a vast proportion of the population to skip the oil, coal and gas route that we've gone through and go straight to the solar solution, for fair trade to scupper that as a solution for India just is daft. It's balmy.
And the cost has to come down a bit for the solar.
The
cost has to come down for solar. It's still more expensive than coal-fired power stations, and we've got to bring down the cost.
There are deals that are made. We'll give you your diesel generator for free. The diesel generator is free, but you have to pay for the fuel. It's like getting a free printer, but you have to pay for the ink cartridges. Well, that's the way that trade is done. We've got to figure out how to break these loops, and solar power will become cheaper. It will become cheaper.
Yes. And
we know that.
There are now perverse subsidies, certainly.
There are perverse subsidies. I think that the subsidies for fossil fuels, we don't realise that without the railways, without the roads, without shipping, fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas wouldn't be viable. And yet the railways have been built and paid for out of public money. Where do fossil fuels pay for the infrastructure that they rely upon? Whereas if we're going to build wind turbines or solar farms, they have to be paid for completely on their own merits, or else they're subsidised and people see the subsidies as being unfair. Well, we've got to get this sorted out.
I agree.